Picture the tale of the shadowed forest. In the early 2000s, when the internet was still a wild and mysterious place, a small online community of horror enthusiasts stumbled upon a chilling legend. The legend spoke of a forgotten forest, hidden deep within the heart of rural America, where the shadows themselves seemed to come alive. The legend began with a young couple, Sarah and Mark, who had moved to a quaint farmhouse on the outskirts of the town of Ravenwood. The locals were friendly enough, but they all seemed to share a secret, something they refused to speak about openly. It wasn't long before Sarah and Mark started to hear the whispers about the shadowed forest. The forest was said to be cursed, a place where light barely penetrated the dense canopy of twisted, gnarled trees. It was a place where people disappeared without a trace, where shadows moved on their own, and where a malevolent presence was said to dwell. Curious and a bit skeptical, Sarah and Mark decided to investigate the forest one crisp autumn afternoon. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the sunlight grew dim, and an eerie silence enveloped them. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The couple soon realized they were lost, their path obscured by the thick undergrowth and the ever-present shadows. Suddenly, they heard a rustling sound behind them. They turned, but there was nothing there. The rustling grew louder, more insistent, as if something was stalking them. Panic set in and they started to run, but the forest seemed to conspire against them, twisting their path and leading them deeper into its heart. As night fell, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Desperate for shelter, they rushed inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were covered in strange, indecipherable symbols. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, its surface cracked and smeared with what looked like dried blood. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow with an unholy light. Shadows poured out from its surface, writhing and twisting as they filled the room. Sarah and Mark tried to escape, but the shadows were too fast, too strong. They enveloped the couple, dragging them into the mirror's dark depths. Days later, the townspeople of Ravenwood found the abandoned cabin. Inside, they discovered the mirror, its surface now eerily smooth and clean. There was no sign of Sarah or Mark, only a chilling sense of dread that hung in the air. The legend of the shadowed forest grew, spreading through the online community like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen the couple's faces in the mirror, their expressions frozen in eternal terror. Others whispered that the shadows had found new victims, drawing more and more people into the forest's cursed embrace. And so, the shadowed forest remains, a place where the light never truly reaches, and where the shadows hunger for the souls of the curious and the brave. Those who hear its call are warned. Once you enter, you may never escape its grasp. The Forgotten VHS. In the early 2000s, my family moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. The previous owner, an elderly man, had passed away, and his relatives had sold the place as is, including all the furniture and possessions. Among the dusty relics and antique furniture in the attic, I found an old VHS tape, unlabeled and worn. Being a curious teenager with a fascination for old media, I decided to watch it. I dusted off our old VCR, popped the tape in, and sat back as the screen flickered to life. The video began with a distorted home recording, dated sometime in the mid-90s. The footage was shaky and grainy, showing a family, parents and two young children, enjoying a seemingly normal day at a local park. They were smiling, laughing, and playing, but something felt off. The audio was garbled, with occasional bursts of static, and the camera would jitter, almost as if someone else was controlling it. The scenes changed abruptly. The next segment showed the family inside a house, their house, preparing for dinner. The atmosphere had shifted. The smiles were gone, replaced by strained expressions. The father would occasionally glance at the camera, his eyes wide, with a mix of fear and anger. The mother seemed to be talking to the children, but her words were inaudible, drowned out by the rising static. Then, the video cut to night. The family was asleep, the camera now seemingly stationary in a corner of the living room. There was an oppressive silence, only broken by the occasional creak of the house settling. Suddenly a soft, eerie humming filled the room. The camera zoomed in on the hallway, where a shadowy figure emerged, moving slowly towards the bedrooms. The figure was tall and thin, its movements unnatural, almost glitchy. It paused at the first door, the children's room, and the humming grew louder. The door creaked open, and the figure slipped inside. The static on the tape intensified, obscuring the view, but I could see the children start to thrash in their beds as if caught in a nightmare. The figure leaned over them, its face a blur, and the screen went black. When the video resumed, it was morning. The family was sitting in the living room, visibly shaken. The father spoke directly to the camera for the first time, his voice clear despite the static. "Whoever finds this tape," he said, "do not watch it. Destroy it immediately. It knows." The screen filled with static again, and the tape ended. My heart was pounding, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I ejected the tape and stared at it, contemplating the father's warning, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know more. Over the next few days, I tried to find information about the family, the house, anything that could explain what I had seen. I searched online, asked neighbors, even visited the local library, but there was nothing. It was as if they never existed. Then, strange things started happening. At night, I would hear the same eerie humming from the video, growing louder and closer. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and my dreams were plagued by that glitchy figure. The final straw came when I woke up one morning to find my bedroom door ajar, the tape missing from where I had hidden it. Terrified, I told my parents everything. They didn't believe me, of course, attributing it to an overactive imagination. But I knew better. I packed my things and moved to my grandparents' house in another state, hoping to escape whatever curse the tape had brought upon me. Years later, I still think about that tape and the family in it. I've come to realize that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some warnings should always be heeded. So if you ever find an old VHS tape, unlabeled and worn, be cautious, because it might just be waiting for you to press play. The Whispering Shadows. It was the summer of 2004, a time when MySpace ruled the internet and cell phones were more about playing Snake than browsing the web. I was 16, spending my days in a small town where nothing ever happened. That summer, my friends and I discovered an old, abandoned house on the edge of town, hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted gates. The house had been vacant for years, its windows broken and walls covered in graffiti. It was the perfect spot for us to hang out and tell ghost stories. We were young and fearless, always looking for a thrill. Little did we know, we were about to find more than we bargained for. One evening, just as the sun was setting and casting long, eerie shadows, we dared each other to spend the night in the house. Armed with flashlights, snacks, and a cheap camcorder, we ventured inside. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. We settled in the living room, its furniture covered with white sheets that looked like ghostly figures in the dim light. As the night grew darker, we took turns telling creepy stories, trying to outdo each other. It was around midnight when Jake, the bravest of our group, suggested we explore the house. We split into pairs, each taking a different part of the house. My friend Sarah and I headed upstairs. The staircase groaned with every step, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The second floor was even more decrepit than the first, with cobwebs hanging like curtains and wallpaper peeling off in long, yellowed strips. We entered what seemed to be a bedroom. The furniture was old and dusty, but what caught our attention was the mirror on the wall. It was an ornate, antique thing, its surface clouded with age. As we approached, I thought I saw something move in the reflection. I dismissed it as a trick of the light. Sarah, always the curious one, wiped away some of the grime on the mirror. That's when we both saw it, a dark figure standing behind us. We spun around, our hearts pounding, but the room was empty. We turned back to the mirror, and the figure was still there, closer now. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Panic set in, and we bolted out of the room, screaming for the others. We found Jake and our other friend Mark in the hallway. They looked pale and shaken. Before we could explain what we saw, Jake whispered, "We need to leave. Now!" We didn't ask questions. We ran down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. We didn't stop until we were back at Jake's house. Only then did we share what we had experienced. Jake and Mark had seen the same figure in the basement, whispering their names and beckoning them closer. That night, none of us slept. The next day, we went back to the house to retrieve our camcorder. To our horror, we found it smashed on the floor. When we checked the footage, most of it was static. But in the few clear frames, we saw glimpses of the figure, always just out of focus, always watching. We never went back to that house. Years later, I did some research and discovered that the house had a dark history. In the early 1900s, a family had lived there, and the father had gone mad, murdering his wife and children before taking his own life. Since then, every attempt to sell or renovate the house ended in tragedy. To this day, I still see the figure in my dreams, whispering my name, beckoning me back to that cursed place. The whispering shadows, as we came to call them, have never truly left us. And every now and then, I wonder if they ever will.